Shinsekai Yori provides us with a profoundly disturbing dystopia. I think what makes it the most disturbing is that by the end of the show, you realize that everyone was pretty much acting in rational self interest. That from their perspective, they were perfectly justified in doing what they did, and that it was very much serving the greater good. I think the thing that makes it disturbing, though, is the greater goods are all mutually exclusive to one another. And even if there are some characters who I think are dishonest about what their motivations are and did it out of a sense of pride or petty revenge or something, if we take at face value what their motivations are, it all pretty much makes sense. And it's something that you would probably do if you were inserted into the same situation. And it really just kind of your mind struggles to figure it out. And as you're going through it, they keep presenting like, okay, here's going to be the big bad. Here's the big bad. Is it the council? Is it the secret police? Is it the monster rats? Is it the queen of the monster rats? Is it Squealer? Is it this? Is it that? And you keep thinking, okay, there's going to be a bad guy who shows up, and all the problems with the world are going to be his responsibility. But ultimately, no, there can't really be a resolution. I mean, in the show, they resolve the plot, but they don't resolve any of the underlying issues that gave birth to the cause. And at the end, we're left with the question between the two main characters: can humanity change? Can we change our nature? And strangely enough, the show is rather hopeful in that standpoint. But if you were to talk to an international relations specialist, particularly a realist, they would say, no, you can't change human nature. Conflict is driven by rational self interest, or at least perceived rational self interest, and that often comes at the good of others. Now, this is not always the case. If you're exchanging goods, oftentimes that is mutually beneficial. Let's say one country has coal and another country has wheat. The one country can trade the coal for the wheat, and then both countries have a resource they didn't previously have access to. And so that's good for both parties. Oftentimes, international cooperation is positive because there's trade, there's cultural stuff, there's technological stuff. It's often a good idea to cooperate. But in a lot of cases, it is very much a zero sum game. I mean, there's only so much oil in the world. So certain countries are going to inevitably have more oil than other countries, or food, or military power, or any other kind of measurable finite resource. And one state having it means another state can't have it. If America owns 80% of the world's oil, all that's left for the other states is 20%, and it's in their interest to try to take oil away from the US. And this ultimately all comes back to the prisoner's dilemma, or the security dilemma. So, very briefly, the prisoner's dilemma works like this: two accomplices in a crime are arrested. They're both offered a deal if they testify against the other. If both of them testify against each other, both parties will get 3 years. If one testifies against the other and the other opts to remain silent, that person will get 1 year. If both of them refuse to testify, then there's no evidence against them and they both get off scot free. But if you look at it mathematically, it's in each party's self interest to confess on the other party. Sorry, I forgot to mention, if the one party confesses on the other, then the person who gave testimony will get 1 year and the other person will get five. So most people would say either I'm going to get 1 year or 3 years, and that's a better bet than getting 0 or 5 years, especially if you don't trust the other person, because it's in the other person's rational self interest to rat out on you. Likewise, it's in a state's best interest, generally speaking, to gain as much power and resources for itself and to put its interests above those of other states, as it can't really know for sure what the other parties are doing. This is often called the black box of international politics, where you can't really see what decisions are going behind the scenes in another country. And that's why we get into, like, if you look at World War II, just how much ink has been spilt over what Hitler's motivations were. Nazi Germany was a black box in a lot of ways, and people are still debating why X person did this thing to this day. And oftentimes, if you don't have an explanation, you just say it was irrational and the people involved were crazy. And certainly that's sometimes the case. But once again, if you were able to see inside the black box from their perspective, you'd probably find that a lot of these things did make sense at the time. And this also comes to one of the issues of nationalism, where very often two different groups will claim the same piece of land as their homeland. You had this during the Yugoslav War, where Croatians, Serbians, Albanians all considered similar parts of the Balkans to be their homeland and fought each other over them. Theoretically, they could share them in a Yugoslav type arrangement, and I guess that would be an example of cooperating in the prisoner's dilemma. But each group sees it in its self interest to try to take it, because if they can take it and drive everybody else out, then it's theirs forever. And it's kind of the final solution to the problem. So, how does this all apply to Shinsekai Yori? Well, let's just go back a bit and let's talk about the world that we live in. So, at the beginning of the 21st century, humans begin to develop something called Cantus, or in the dub, power. And they develop extremely strong telekinetic abilities. But beyond that, they can do all kinds of fantastical things. Some people can create things, some people can bend light, they can fly, they can generate electricity, they can generate fire. More or less, every human with Cantus becomes a god in and of themselves. Or not quite as powerful at the beginning, but it begins to happen. And people with Cantus, enough of the people with them are psychotic or evil or sadists or something, and they begin to kill thousands and thousands of people. Some people with Cantus will destroy entire cities by themselves. And the normal people turn on the people with Cantus and try to exterminate them, but they aren't really able to get every last one. And since any particular person with it is the equivalent of a walking nuke that can be used any number of times, they wind up overthrowing and destroying most of normal human society. So from this, a couple different groups emerge. There is the slave dynasties, which is a civilization where Cantus users rule over normal humans. And they're basically genocidal maniacs who just kill millions of them on like a monthly basis. Some groups of humans devolve into hunter-gatherers, and there's a third party who's the focus of the story, who try to preserve technology, preserve civilization, preserve as much as the old world as possible, and they're people who have powers. So the question, of course, is then how are you going to do that when everybody in your society is a god, when any of them could at any point blow the entire city up and kill everybody else? How are you going to deal with that? And the answer is they come up with this like bizarre combination of religion, psychology, genetics, sociology, all just this stuff that's thrown together to create something called the death of shame. And the death of shame basically prevents humans from killing each other. If a human kills another human, their genetics and psychology will trigger and kill them, preventing anyone from going on a murderous rampage. You also have the issue that the psychological conditioning makes it so they can't even consider the possibility of being able to attack another human being or try to kill another human being. So there's a bunch of different things they do. There's extensive genetic modification. They rebuild their social system to resemble that of the bonobo. So people in this society, I think guests tend to be more physical. It's really weird because it seems like they almost have state-sponsored homosexuality when they're like teenagers or something. Although most people seem to live as monogamous married couples when they're adults. But something like that. They take social aspects of bonobos and they take aspects of Buddhism where they put like mental blocks in people to reduce their ability to use their powers. One of the things they do is they seal their power, but they give them a mantra that allows them to use the power. And then all the children from the society go to school where they're closely monitored. And that's kind of where we start to get into this story where we follow a group of kids as they grow up in this system. And at the beginning, it looks like everything is completely messed up and it's run by this totalitarian, insane government. Because kids keep disappearing from the school. If they do very minor infractions, their friends keep going away. It's all very disturbing and suspicious. And later on, we find out, though, that, yeah, they kind of had to do that because people with Cantus can develop two different issues when they're younger. They can be a sociopath or have some form of antisocial personality disorder, in which case the death of shame doesn't work on them and they can kill as many other humans as they want, whereas the other humans aren't able to kill them in return. And then the other one is a karmic demon who's someone who's not evil but has lost control of their powers. And they continue to go stronger even as they go insane, and it begins to rip apart and mutate reality around them. So they more or less just have to get rid of the people who have these issues because a single ogre is basically an infinitely reusable nuke in which there is no actual defense against it. So they try to kill them before they get to this point. And to that end, they've developed these like shadow cats that they send out to kill people, which is a way of skirting around the whole issue. So as we kind of learn, it looks like they're very cold, they're very calculating. Like one of their friends gets kicked out of school and they think that he's dead, but they go and find him and he's literally destroying reality around himself because he's become a karmic demon. You're like, yeah, they probably needed to exile and kill him. One of the characters talks about the last time they had an ogre, he killed like 200 people or something, and they were only able to stop him through kind of sheer chance. I think their society has that people only become fully human when they're like 17 or 18, and they're deemed to have passed all the trials and they're fully capable of controlling their powers. The society is also extremely strict on what information gets out about the past world, about genetics and stuff like that. So you have this disturbing totalitarian society where people keep disappearing, people keep dying, where there's this omnipresent council that's suppressing people's memories, but it's 100% rational because any one of them can turn into a nuke and destroy the world, more or less. So within this context, we have all this evil being done in the name of the greater good, but a question kind of remains, and you don't really think about it too much until the last episode. Okay, so people with powers have been conditioned to not be able to hurt other humans. What about humans without powers? And the issue is, when they implemented the death of shame, the humans without powers gained the position of power because they could freely kill people who couldn't fight back. So the solution they came up with, and this is kind of a bizarre fantasy thing, is throughout the show you see the monster rats, and what they are is they're humans who have been using Cantus mixed with mole rat genes until they've become some sort of weird beast person. The idea being to create an intelligent species that could function as kind of a servile caste, but that didn't look human and didn't act human, so you could kill them without triggering the death of shame. And it's quite common because they don't consider them to be sentient beings for the humans to just go and exterminate entire colonies of them. And once again, I mean, that's obviously kind of insane, but that was kind of, they had to solve the problem, and that was the only way they could really go about it, because they had kind of painted themselves into a corner with the whole, okay, we have these people in the population who we have no ability to control, and they can kill us and rule over us and make us their slaves. So we can't kill them, so we're going to have to do something else with them as a way of getting rid of them. So once again, it's irrational action. You have a society that's actively created a slave caste that kills children on a like daily basis, that alters people's minds and all this other just insane stuff. But once again, it's all perfectly rational and it's all moral. Depending on your moral compass, it's morally justifiable. And then we enter into the other side of this, which is the monster rats, who understandably hate their position, they hate humanity, but there's really nothing they can do about it, because once again, every individual human is a nuclear weapon. And any number of them can basically be killed by one human. There are ways to kill humans, like if you sneak up on them or you kill them in their sleep or with poison gas or something. But by and large, there's not a lot you can do against humans. Early in the series, we have one of the main characters basically take down an entire colony completely by himself. Now, the monster rats have a social structure. Mole rats are interesting because them and a different type of mole are the only eusocial animals, in which case they have specialized castes that are physically different from one another. So naked mole rats will have queens actually that birth all the children within the colony. So there are monster rat queens who, as far as we can determine, all seem completely insane to me, but they're the leaders of the colony. So we have Squealer, and Squealer views the queens and the humans as a mechanism of repression. So he confederates a bunch of the monster rat tribes together. He actually goes ahead and lobotomizes all of the queens, and they institute parliamentary democracy, which is code word for he just becomes the Republican dictator and sole ruler of kind of half the monster rats in the world. And his ultimate goal is to destroy humanity and allow his people to become the dominant life form on Earth. And once again, it's a case where humanity has to keep the monster rats in line because they're the only other sentient creature who can physically go after them. And they don't, in their minds, consider them to be morally equivalent to them because they're some sort of weird monster creature. Likewise, the monster rats, the humans are just oppressive beings that pretend to be gods. When they really aren't, they're just evil and abusive. So this gets us into Squealer's master plan. So this is another case of something that seems evil but is entirely necessary. So two of the kids run away together from the group, and they're sent out to, the main characters are sent out to try to find them, and they aren't able to. And they're told if they can't find them and bring them back, then they're going to send everybody out to try to kill them. So they lie and claim that the two of them are dead because they don't want their friends to get killed. But as it turns out, it was extremely important that they tell them that they didn't die and someone deal with the issue. So the monster rats give them a sanctuary until they have a child, and then they kill them both and they raise the human as a monster rat. So the child is conditioned to think it's a monster rat and that humans are a different species. They never let it look into a mirror and realize that it's a different species than them. So they can use it to just kill humans and use it as a their own super weapon, and there's nothing humanity can do about it. And once again, this is a rational act on behalf of Squealer. And we can even see this where humanity had kind of come to the decision that Squealer was getting too big for his britches and he needed to be put down. And they were going to exterminate him and his entire colony, however many hundreds of thousands it is, as if someone was just clipping toenails. So Squealer is 100% justified in wanting to kill off humanity because they can just decide to kill him at any point in time. So he launches his preemptive attack, and obviously he massacres civilians, children, that sort of thing. But once again, the children are all walking nukes, and they can grow up to be walking nukes. And kind of his ultimate plan is he wants to steal all the babies from the nursery and then raise his own army of superhumans with the idea of eventually maybe even taking over the rest of the world and all of mainland Japan. But the main characters eventually manage to defeat him. The monster rats are reduced once again to slavery. I'm not sure if they get exterminated. They make a deal with one of them to preserve his colony's queen if he sacrifices himself for them. But once again, it's the whole issue is unresolved. The two can't coexist together indefinitely. The humans with Cantus are just too powerful. There's something called natural equality, and this is a concept that Thomas Hobbes came up with. And the idea is, theoretically at least, Any human being is strong enough to kill any other human being. Regardless of how powerful you are, how wealthy you are, how smart you are, if you get shot in the head, you're probably going to die. And people are vulnerable to the same illnesses, old age, that kind of thing. Humans are kind of frail creatures. But when you have people who are basically walking nukes, that gets rid of the whole natural equality thing. Each person is an entire army in and of themselves, and they can be more or less totally self sufficient. And one person with Cantus can rule over or defeat any number of other people with it. So, once again, it was a rational decision when America and some of these other countries tried to exterminate their Cantus population because they were 100% right. They did destroy the world and they did reduce them to slavery. And when the tables turned again, they had to reduce the non Cantus population to slavery. And so we do have this kind of endless karmic cycle of people attacking each other, and ultimately there is no solution for this. At least presented. Now, in real life, there are some suggestions that people have come up with to try to resolve the security dilemma. Probably the best one is mutually assured destruction. The idea that if states have nuclear weapons, they will be inclined to not go to war and to cooperate because everyone will basically be holding a gun to each other's head. The problem with that is humans are fallible and mistakes can always happen. And mistakes are a lot worse when you have ICBMs. There's also the idea of one of the things in defensive realism is if all countries spend more money on defense than offense, and it's too expensive for countries to attack one another, that's a way of maintaining peace. There's the idea of sharing information and making your country's intentions very clear to try to avoid the whole black box thing where distrust and fear kind of prevent it. There's things like cultural exchanges, there's trade agreements. One of the reasons for global free trade is the idea is if we can integrate the global economy, countries will be mutually dependent on each other economically, and they won't want to go to war or form other types of conflict. To a certain extent, that was kind of the idea behind the EU, was it was a way to control Germany and France and keep them from starting continental wars every 20 years. And it worked. It created a whole host of other problems, but creating the EU did stop Western Europe from trying to destroy each other every couple decades, at least for the moment. Another way is to have a hegemon or someone who basically plays the adult in the room and mediates between the other parties. That's not so much a just person as there's only one will then that's supreme and all others are subordinate to it. So you at least then get some sort of consistency and someone has ultimate authority. But it is a very difficult question, and I think it comes down to what you think about human nature. If humans are changeable, and how much the actions of any particular person bears on the whole. So that's my sci-fi pulsi of Shinsekai Yori. I hope you enjoyed it. God bless, and more content to come.